Chapter 1. The War. Thousands of years ago, a being of great and terrible power existed. The original dragon, a being said to scorch the earth with fire and surge the skies with lightning. This dragon's power was so revered that anyone in its presence would flee in fear to preserve their own life. This cycle continued for many generations, endlessly, until around 3,000 years ago. One man stood in defiance of this dragon. The man showed no fear, no hesitation in his resolve, his truth, or his ideals. This one act of defiance was strange to this dragon. No one had ever stood against it. It called into question all of the virtues that the dragon had come to know of humanity. On that day, this one human earned the dragon's respect and a lifelong companion. Because of this experience, the dragon halted its rampage across the world. With the wrath of the dragon now quelled by the man, humanity, and Pokemon then set out to build a society. But with humanity, in time, selfish desires came to the surface. And again, within a few years, all of the small tribes that had settled across the land were at war with one another over resources and beliefs, all except one. The man had tamed the original dragon and had become the leader of one of these tribes. He possessed the lone ability to protect his people with the power of his companion. But no matter how many times he was successful in the defense of his people, there was always more danger. This continued until it became clear to the man that if he wanted peace, then he would have to prepare for war. With the support of his people and his companion, the man set out to end the conflict once and for all. It took a few years, but the man and the absolute power on his side were able to unify all of the people across the land and brought the first real peace to the region. Due to his sacrifice and the control over the legendary dragon, the man was named as the first king of this new kingdom, a kingdom that would become known as Unova, meaning peaceful union. This time of peace ushered in a time of prosperity never before seen in Unova. But the man by now had aged 10 years and had begun to change. He had seen the horrors of war, poverty, famine, and death, and he worried for the future of Unova and the legacy that he had built. These fears haunted the man, but he eventually found some peace when he took a wife, as he no longer had to bear his burdens alone. In time, the wife of the king sired two heirs to the throne, twin brothers, who the king saw continued salvation to his kingdom and his legacy. Little did he know, his sons would destroy everything he built, right down to the foundation. Chapter 2. A Kingdom Divided. 10 years pass. The young princes have been groomed by the king to reflect his beliefs, but one believes more in truth, while the other follows the path of ideals. But the king is blind to this fault due to his fear for his kingdom and his legacy, and in time, it will only get worse. Another space of time passes, and now the young princes are men, and the king has now become a frail old man. The day comes when the king finally takes his last breath, and in his final moments, the king leaves his kingdom to both of his sons, with the stipulation of preserving his legacy. The king also urges his lifelong companion to support his sons in every decision they make. With that, the king parts from this world, saddened by the loss of the one who unified the warring tribes. The kingdom came together in a ceremony to honor the king like none had before, and to remember him, a great tower was erected in his honor, where he could rest in peace for all time. Once the time of mourning had passed, the two new kings set forth to honor their father's request and preserve his legacy. Unfortunately, the time of peace the king and the legendary dragon had worked so hard to create and maintain would not last. For you see, with two kings comes two opposing views on the world. One king to follow truths, and the other one to embrace ideals. And with it, a divide formed in the kingdom, and to much unrest during this time, the twin kings lost their mother as well, which was the only conscience the two had shared. After the passing of their mother, the kings could no longer see eye to eye, even though they were brothers, and ultimately chose to split the kingdom into two kingdoms, one of ideals and another of truths. All of this caused a conflict in the original dragon, as it could not properly honor the request of its former master and friend. But these actions brought a peace to the land, albeit a temporary one. Because the two kings have inherited the greatest weakness of their father, his paranoia, they have a lack of trust in their own blood, both thinking the other would seek power like their father did before them. Each king started planning a secret invasion of the other kingdom, with the main strategy of their plan being the original dragon, who had at this time retreated to its home in the giant chasm, an area outside of the rule of both kings. Chapter 3. Beginning of the End. After years of planning and carrying out small attacks on each other's kingdom, the kings decided to enact their plans for invasion and conquest. But for both of them to be successful, they needed the power of the legendary dragon. So in secret, both kings set out to convince the dragon to join their cause, like their father did before them. After many days of travel, the kings arrived in the chasm at the same time. They are met with the dragon, who greets them, but can sense hostility in the two brothers. When the two brothers plead their case to the dragon, it thrashes about in a violent rage, attacking everything in sight. It cannot handle the opposing ideals and truths, and honor its promise to serve the two kings, as was requested of him. Then, an explosion of light envelops the two kings. Once the light fades, two very distinct and different cries come from within the dust. Then, with a gust of wind, where the one dragon once stood, now stood two in direct opposition of one another. The two kings, in shocked silence, could only guess that the original dragon, unable to fill its roles with two opposing virtues, split itself into two new beings. Zekrom of ideals, one king calls. Reshiram of truths calls the other. The two dragons take to the side of their king, and a mighty clash proceeds, not knowing that in the shadows, a third dragon watches, weak from the separation of its other two parts. In the end, the two kings could not gain any ground on this battlefield, as their dragons were evenly matched. So, they retreat back to their respective kingdoms to plan their next attack. Over the course of many years, many battles are fought, with each king ordering countless men to their deaths, all in the name of their beliefs. In the end, after all the battles and destruction, everything their father built lay in ruins. At this point, the two brothers only blamed each other for the destruction of their father's kingdom. In a final attempt to win the war, the two brothers led what remaining forces they had to a final confrontation. The two dragons clashed with all their power, eradicating everything in sight. In the end, only the two kings were left, as their two dragons had reverted to a stone form of some sort, because all of their power had been exerted. In the end, both brothers, ashamed of what they had done, decided to separate. The oldest brother, who believed in truths, left the Unova region for a land far across the sea, while the youngest brother retreated to the one place in Unova still left standing, his childhood home, the castle his father had built, to live out the rest of his days in exile. Today, we pick up with Iris, Roxie, and Ash. They are north of Icera City, exploring a place that Iris knows far too well. Ash asks Iris if she has ever been here before. Iris replies, yes, this is where N resurrected Reshiram, the Dragon of Truths, 2 years prior. Iris explains that the Dragon Spiral Tower had been sealed since ancient times. It was rumored to be the tomb of one of Unova's ancient kings, so out of respect, no one had ever tried to enter. But it turns out it actually housed Reshiram, who hadn't been seen for 3,000 years. Roxie says, I remembered watching that match on TV, and you were able to beat N and win the Victory Road tournament. Iris says, yeah. Actually, that's where I first met Axew. Ash asks, what do you mean? Iris says, she had Axew's egg for many months, well over a year at least, but it didn't hatch. Then, in the battle with N, in order to save me, Axew absorbed the energy of Reshiram and hatched. As a result, Reshiram reverted to its white stone form. After, N then disappeared with the stone. No one has seen him since that day. Ash says, that sounds dangerous. Iris says, we thought that Team Plasma was done that day, but they were working in the shadows this whole time, capturing the other legendary Pokemon of Unova. Roxie then says, hey Iris, isn't there another dragon besides Reshiram? Iris says, oh, you mean Zekrom, the Dragon of Truths? Ash says, what's that? Iris says that an ancient legend passed down in her village tells the tale of Reshiram and its counterpart, Zekrom. Iris says that there are many legends about the two, even a legend claiming that the two dragons were once one. Ash says, well, where is Zekrom? Iris says, well, no one knows. It never awakened like Reshiram did, so it could be anywhere. Roxie says, hey, look at this. You see, in the years since the tower had been opened, it had become somewhat of a tourist attraction, and one of the displays claims that there's a castle about a day's walk from here. It was built around the same time that the tower was. colors. This excites Ash and Riolu. They both want to see it. This too intrigues Iris, as she didn't even know that it existed. So, the group decides to head to the castle. Meanwhile, after they're lost at the hands of Ash and Riolu in their mountain base, pressure is on for Culrus to deliver on some results. Getsis, the true leader of Team Plasma, is growing wary of Culrus, and has ordered the Shadow Triad to keep a close watch on him, fully aware that Culrus let Ash go. Zinzolan questions Getsis' decisions, as they have gained no new ground in their plan, and all they keep finding is dead ends. They are expending resources, time, and money, all things that they are in short supply of. Getsis does agree with Zinzolan, but they still need Culrus, as he has not yet found the last piece of their puzzle, the Black Dragon, Zekrom. Without it, they will never truly be able to fulfill their goals and rule over Unova, as Getsis' ancestors did so many years ago. Back at the tower with Ash and the group, Riolu senses something and takes off into the tower. Ash gives chase, eventually coming to a wall with a hole in it. It was a previously undiscovered room in the tower, veiled in darkness to everyone except Riolu. Without warning, it fires an aura sphere into the darkness, but it is deflected back at it from the shadows. Ash tells Riolu to be on guard. Then, from the darkness, a Pokemon strikes. It's an Acelgor, which can only mean one thing. Ash yells, "Come out, Andriel." The Shadow Triad emerges from the darkness. Ash proclaims, "It doesn't matter what you do, but you won't get Riolu." Andriel says, "Foolish boy, although I would love to put you in your place, you're not my orders. Luckily, I've already finished what I've came here for." Then, in a flash, Andriel and Acelgor are gone. Riolu can no longer sense them. Roxie and Iris then join Ash and Riolu. Ash explains what is going on and how Andriel was here, but he's gone now. Then, a voice from outside the room is heard. "What have you done?" it proclaims. The group walks out, and there stands a man who seems to be enraged. Iris recognizes this man. It's Professor Juniper, father of Professor Juniper. He recognizes Iris, and his demeanor automatically changes. Iris explains what happened and how it was Team Plasma. Professor Juniper is concerned. Team Plasma back at the tower after all this time, and they found this room. The professor eventually starts to examine the room. He tells Iris he will be in touch once he has an answer. With that, the trio choose to head to the castle to get a look at Unova's ancient past. Over with Andriel. He has arrived back at the Team Plasma base, in the middle of Getsis berating Culrus for not delivering on the results he promised. Culrus turns to Andriel. "Did you acquire what I asked for?" Andriel says, "Here," and hands Culrus a flash drive. Getsis demands to know the meaning of this interruption. Culrus says, "It's simple. These are the results you ordered and I promised." Culrus then heads to his computer and uploads the contents of the flash drive. Culrus then asks Andriel if he has the other item he requested. Andriel asks, "You doubt me?" as he pulls out an item fresh from the tomb below the tower. Getsis says, "You dare desecrate the tomb of one of my ancestors?" Culrus just says, "Please, it's not like we haven't done something like this before. Now it upsets you?" Then, the computer goes off. Culrus smiles. The code has been cracked. "What?" Getsis proclaims. Culrus responds, "I have the location of the legendary Black Stone, the Castle of Vale." "What?" "We already searched that castle years ago," Getsis says. "Yes, but we didn't have the seal of the king," as Culrus holds up the ring of Unova's long-deceased king. About a week later, Ash, Iris, and Roxie end up at their destination, the Grand Castle of the Vale. It took a little longer than it should have, because Ash and Riolu had to stop and battle everything in sight. But they are glad to finally be at their destination. And the site at the base of the castle is a vast, lush maze. Roxie says, "Hey, look at the sign." It's a sign that says, "The Liberty Garden, in honor of the king's last friend." Roxie asks, "I wonder what that means." Then they hear a voice. "The garden was in honor of the king's last known companion." Iris turns and asks who the lady is. The girl says, "Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Carlita. I'm one of the keepers of the castle." Ash rushes over to her. "What do you mean, king's last known companion?" Carlita says, "The ancient king who once ruled this castle, after a tragedy in Unova's ancient past, it said that the king lived in exile here, in the castle, until his death." Iris says, "That's so sad. To die alone, that's the last thing anyone would want." Carlita says, "True, but it's said that during his final days, the king was not alone. An unknown individual was said to be a companion to the king." Roxie says, "Who was it?" Carlita says, "Well, no one really knows. It's said that it was a Pokemon no one has ever really seen. Others say it was just a rumor to give the story a happy ending." "Well, that's still sad either way," Iris states. Iris then apologizes and introduces herself and the group, and she explains that they are here to see the castle's wonders. Carlita says the group has come at a good time. The tourist time of the year is practically over, so the castle is empty. They can explore it to their heart's desire. But Carlita warns, the castle has many passages and corridors. It's easy to get turned around and to get lost, so be careful. Ash and Riolu get excited. "So you mean we can go anywhere we want?" Carlita says yes, but be careful. But it's too late. Ash and Riolu are already gone. Roxie says, "Don't worry, they'll come back when they get hungry." Roxie sets out to explore the Liberty Garden, while Iris is interested in the lore of the castle, having grown up in the village of the dragon. dragons. Meanwhile, from the window at the highest point in the castle, someone watches excitedly. Ash and Riolu have disappeared deep into the castle, but they're not worried. Ash loves what he sees. Walls lined with armor and ancient relics. Ash imagines himself as a knight in ancient Unova, and as he is lost in his daydream, Riolu starts to explore. With Riolu being blind, it can still sense its surroundings. It's more sensitive to things around it, and after searching around, it begins to pick up on the presence of another. It's not a hostile presence, it's a sad presence. Riolu tries to get Ash's attention, firing an aura sphere at him to knock him back to reality. Riolu tries to convey the other presence to Ash, but with little success, until something on a table nowhere near the two falls and breaks on the floor. Ash starts to panic. Great, Carlita's gonna think we broke it. Riolu finally gets Ash's attention, and he realizes what Riolu was trying to say. Ash tells Riolu to lead the way, and the duo give chase. Over with Iris and Carlita, the two are in deep conversation about the lore of the castle. Iris asks how any of this about the castle is actually known to be true. Carlita says, well, we do know that the king had a brother who after the war left Unova for a place beyond the sea. Then, several years later, one of the children of that brother returned to Unova to check on the king. But what the prince found was a scene that was most discouraging. The king was deceased and had been for what seemed years. The prince then sought to return Unova to its former glory and declared himself as the new king of Unova. He spent the rest of his life rebuilding what the father and his uncle had destroyed, aiming to return Unova to the glory of his grandfather, even defending it from a war from beyond the sea. Iris asks what happened to the king that was found here in the castle. Carlita says no one knows. It's said that when the prince left the castle to survey the surrounding land, when he returned, the king was gone and his body was never found. Iris is stunned. Carlita then says it also could be a legend, as the prince was a man of great honor, wanting to protect his family's legacy. It's possible that he buried the king in secret to protect him from any future grave robbers. I mean, look at what happened to the Dragon Spiral Tower. Iris says, what do you mean? Carlita says that tower was the tomb of the first king of Unova. Team Plasma broke into the tower to get the legendary Pokemon Reshiram. Iris says, that place is a tomb? Now I feel really bad. Carlita says, why? Iris says, I was the one who stopped Team Plasma. If I would have put them down sooner, then the tower would still be sealed. Carlita tells Iris not to be so hard on herself. She didn't know Team Plasma would do that. Carlita then asks if they will be staying the night, as it's getting pretty late. Iris shrugs. You do that? Carlita says not normally, but since the tourists are all gone and it's hours to the next town, it's better if you just stay the night. Iris takes Carlita up on the offer and asks what's next. Carlita says, now we make food. Over in the Liberty Garden, Roxie is exploring with Zora. The two are enjoying themselves, just walking around. After some time, they come across something stone that is covered in foliage. Roxie starts to pull away from the overgrown plants to reveal what looks like a door, but it seems to be sealed from within. When someone calls out to her, what are you doing here? Roxie looks, and there stands a man who looks very upset. Roxie apologizes and introduces herself. The man asks again, what are you doing here? Roxie nervously says she was given permission to look through the garden. The man asks, oh, by who? Roxie says, Carlita, the groundskeeper. The man says, of course, sternly. My name is Damon, her older brother, and the head groundskeeper. I must ask you to please leave that door alone. Roxie says, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know it was off limits. Damon then asks Roxie to return to the castle as it's getting dark. Roxie complies, walking over from the door, but not before noticing a symbol on the door. Back in the castle, Ash and Riolu are chasing something that can't be seen. Ash thinks to himself, this is odd. It's almost like we're being played with, as things are being knocked off the tables and walls, forcing Riolu and Ash to save them from breaking. Ash is getting tired of this, and asks Riolu if it can get a lock on it. Riolu nods, and Ash orders an aura sphere that appears to hit something, but then the craziness stops. Riolu looks around, trying to sense the presence that it felt before, but it's gone. Then, Ash hears Iris calling, saying the food is ready. This catches Ash's attention, and he and Riolu run off to find Iris, leaving the presence Riolu felt to contemplate what just happened. When Ash arrives to the dining area, he is met with Carlita arguing with a man who Roxie says is Carlita's brother. He is against them being here, but Carlita says that she has already invited them to stay the night. After much back and forth, Damon eventually concedes to them, saying just one night, mostly just to shut Carlita up. The group then eats an extensive meal Carlita and Iris had cooked, which Riolu and Ash gladly take part in. During the meal, Carlita asks how everyone's tour was. Ash, being the only one alone at that time, tells everyone what happened and how one of the ancient relics broke. Carlita and Damon look at each other with concern. Then Then Carlita just says, don't worry, everything that is on display is a replica of the original, so the original doesn't get damaged. This gives Ash a sense of relief. Then he explains that Riolu was able to send something that couldn't be seen, but when Riolu fired an Aurasphere at it, it hit something in midair. Then whatever it was vanished. Damon and Carlita give each other another look, but just respond, that's strange, as the group finishes their meal. Later, after more exploring, the group gets a chance to choose a room for them to spend the night in. This excites Ash, and he tells Riolu to go find a good one. Then he and Riolu take off, eventually finding a room that Riolu can feel a familiar presence in. Riolu makes a choice for this room in particular, which Damon gives a concerning glance, but says nothing, as Ash is excited as the room is very elegant. Fit for a king, you could say. Carlita tells Ash that this room belonged to the ancient king of Unova. It is said that this room was his favorite room in all the castle. This room is the room that he was founded when he passed from this life. Some say that at night you can feel the presence of the king, if he thinks you are worthy. Ash turns to Riolu. What do you think, buddy? Should this be our room? Riolu turns and nods, so the two decide to settle in. Roxie and Iris also find a room, and everyone decides to call it a night. A few hours later, Roxie awakens, and Zora has again decided to go explore the castle. Roxie decides to go and look for it. After a while of searching, she eventually finds the mischievous fox and scolds it for not staying in the room. Then, she overhears Damon and Carlita arguing, and the subject is Ash and Riolu. This captures Roxie's attention, so she listens in. Damon asks Carlita how she could invite them to stay the night. They already risk too much by playing the part of caretakers to protect the sanctuary of this place. Carlita tells him that she doesn't think it's going to be a problem. Damon angrily says, and then there's that Riolu. It can sense it. If it can find a passage, our secret's out, and the mission that our family has sworn to uphold for the last 3,000 years will end, and the war will begin again. Carlita apologizes. I'm sorry, I didn't think about it. This is my fault. Damon says no, it's the fault of Team Plasma. If they wouldn't have discovered Reshiram in the Dragon Spiral Tower, then we wouldn't have had to try so hard to cover up this secret. But they must go at first light to avoid any further risk. Carlita agrees, and they walk towards the partially open door that Roxie just happens to be on the other side of. Luckily, as the two emerge from the door, Zora uses power of illusion to hide the two from the sight of the siblings. Once the two are out of sight, Zora lets down the illusion, and Roxie is concerned about what she heard. Over in Iris's room, she can't sleep, as the guilt of not being able to stop Team Plasma from wrecking the Dragon Spiral Tower weighs heavy on her mind, now more than ever. Iris has a beautiful view of a star-filled sky and the Liberty Garden. She looks out the window with Axew, trying to console its trainer, as it can sense her discord. Then, as Iris is lost in thought, she notices movement down in the garden. Iris thinks, this is strange. Everyone should be asleep. Iris tells Axew to follow her, as she decides to head and check it out. Over with Ash, he is passed out, as usual, not a worry in the world. But Riolu, on the other hand, it can't sleep. It can't shake the feeling that it had when it first entered the room, like they are not alone. But nothing has made its presence known, so Riolu has just been on edge, keeping watch. A little bit more time passes, and Riolu finally can sense something different than the one that he felt when they entered the room. Riolu wakes Ash, who is having trouble focusing on what Riolu is trying to warn it about. Then, from the window, an energy ball is fired in their direction, which Riolu uses a force bomb to deflect. Suddenly, when Ash starts to focus, he hears a voice. What an unexpected pleasure. There stand all three of the Shadow Triad. Ash yells, you can't take Riolu. Necrosis responds, well, luckily for you, that's not our orders. We're here to secure the castle. But they didn't say anything about not having a little fun while we were here. Ash doesn't like this. He and Riolu are outnumbered, and his other Pokemon are in their balls that Ash left on the desk that just so happens to be behind the Shadow Triad. What follows is an all-out battle. Riolu versus Excelgor, Excavalier, and Bisharp. Alone, Ash and Riolu can take on any one of these guys, as they have in the past, but all three together, Riolu can't keep up. It ends up taking multiple attacks from all three of the Pokemon. Ash then thinks of a crazy plan, but it's all he has. He orders Riolu to draw all three of the Pokemon in at once. The three Shadow Triad members fall for this and order their Pokemon to all attack at once. In retaliation, Ash orders a counter, which knocks back the three Pokemon. Riolu is successful in causing massive damage, but at a cost. The battle took a toll on Riolu. It is now down and not moving. Ash rushes to its side to block Riolu from any more damage. As the Pokemon charge up their final attacks at the order of the Shadow Triad, a bright flash envelops the room, and when the light clears, Ash and Riolu are gone, much to the frustration of Necrosis and his cohorts. Back with Roxie, she is on her way back to her room, being careful to avoid Carlita and Damon as they headed the same way. While walking back, Zora suddenly gets really defensive, growling with its hair standing up. Roxie notices a figure in the dark moving around. When it comes into the light of the moon, Roxie knows this person, a member of Neo Team Plasma. Roxie can hear them stating that they have infiltrated the castle. She tries to hide in the shadows, tucking up real tight against the walls, when suddenly, when she is about to be spotted, a wall behind her opens up and she falls through, with the wall quickly closing before she is noticed. Out in the Liberty Garden, Iris and Axu are searching for the movement that they saw, but they are desperately lost, as at night, the maze is almost impossible to navigate. After fumbling around for a while, Iris notices movement off in the distance. She calls to them, "Hey you!" The figure takes off running, and Iris gives chase. Iris notices something. She's gaining on the figure. Once she's close enough, she orders Axu to use a Dragon Rage, which connects, knocking the person off its feet, giving Iris time to catch up. When she gets to the person, her eyes widen, and you hear a tremble in her voice, as she says, "N?" Back with Ash, as he opens his eyes, the attacking Pokemon are gone. As a matter of fact, he and Riolu are not even in the same room anymore. This room is an odd one, Ash thinks as he looks around. Then he notices Riolu and rushes to it. Riolu is in bad shape. It's not responsive as Ash calls, and Ash is worried. Ash picks up Riolu and leaves to find out. But this room only has one way in and one way out, a hallway that has no lights and seems to go on forever into darkness. Ash is very uneasy about it, but looks at Riolu and throws caution into the wind as he enters into the darkness. Ash takes his first steps in the darkness, and he hears something that sends shivers down his spine. While from the room, another presence watches as Ash disappears into the darkness. Now with Roxie, she starts to scream as she falls back, but is caught with a hand placed over her mouth. She looks back, and it's Damon and Carlita. Roxie, in a panic, tells Damon and Carlita that they're in danger. Team Plasma, shh, Damon says. We know. Roxie quietly saying, "What do you mean?" Carlita says that they are aware that Team Plasma is here, but they need to get moving. Roxie looks around. They seem to be in a passage of some sort. Roxie asks where they are as they start to walk down this corridor. Damon says, they are in the Relic Corridor, a secret passage hidden within their castle. Roxie asks if these have always been there. Carlita says yes. Roxie asks, well, why doesn't anybody else know about this? Carlita tells Roxie that only people of the Veil know about them and can access them. Roxie says, the people of the Veil? Who's that? Damon interrupts. Enough. You have already said too much, Carlita. We need to focus on securing all of the entrance points, so no one else can enter. Roxie and Carlita get quiet as the trio continue to walk, eventually coming to a room that, for being in an extremely old castle, is adorned with high-tech computers and video surveillance equipment. On the monitors, they can see all of the castles crawling with Neo Team Plasma grunts. Then, on a monitor, Roxie notices that the Shadow Triad is in a room that looks familiar. That's Ash's room, she says. Damon takes to the monitor and checks all the cameras in the area, but there's no sign of Ash or his Riolu. Damon tells her that there's no sign of the two, but it appears that they got away somehow, as the Shadow Triad seem to be searching for him. Roxie says, this is bad. They are always after Ash's Riolu. Damon says, really? With a tone of relief. Roxie says, yes. As long as I've known Ash, his Riolu has been one of the highest priorities of Team Plasma. But then over the audio, they can hear Necrosis speak. We can't worry about the boy right now. We have our orders. We must find the passage. A look of concern falls over Carlita and Damon. Carlita states, no, they are here for the treasure. Roxie thinks, treasure? Damon tells Carlita, don't worry. If we don't know where it is, then they will have no chance at finding it. Roxie then says, hey, I don't want to interrupt, but we need to find Ash and Riolu. They are in danger. Damon replies, don't worry, your friend is safe. It seems the two have made it into a part of the castle even we cannot see. Unfortunately, we have no access to it either. This concerns Roxie, as she thinks, what are these two hiding? Outside in the Liberty Garden, Iris is shocked as she looks on at N. The silence goes on for what seems like an eternity. N finally breaks the silence. It's been a while, Iris. You've grown since the last time we've met. This gets Iris out of her shocked state. N, what are you doing here? Are you still working with Team Plasma? Why was your declaration to disband Team Plasma a lie? Iris is just berating N with questions when he lunges at her and pulls her into the bushes. This startles Iris and she starts to flail as N whispers, be quiet. As they look out and they see Team Plasma grunts are prowling the Liberty Garden. Iris says, I knew it. You are with them. And replies, no, I have not gone back on my word. This stops Iris in mid-rant and continues, I did disband Team Plasma and I remain true to my word. The one behind this is my father, Getsis, and his new leader of Team Plasma, Culrus. Iris thinks, I know that name, then says, we met a scientist once by that name in the desert resort, and says, yes, he is after the legendary Pokemon in Unova in order to fulfill the plans of my father. Iris, concerned, says, what do you mean? And asks, as a member of the Village of the Dragons, have you been made aware of the wars of ancient Unova? Iris questions, wars? And says, yes, wars. Iris states, she knows about the legend of the ancient war between the legendary dragons of Ideals and Truth, but I didn't know about a second war, and says, yes, there was a second war, and it was said to be ended by a weapon of ultimate power. My father has spent his life searching for any truths in these legends, and that is how he found out Reshiram was sealed in the Dragon Spiral Tower. Unfortunately, opening the tower was a mistake. Iris says, well yeah, we know that now. After all, it is a tomb, and says, this is true, but not the reason why opening it was a mistake. Iris says, well, why was it a mistake? And says, while the tower only contained the Dragon of Truth, it did contain information on the location of the Dragon of Ideals, and other information of Unova's ancient past. That is why I'm here. When I found out that my father had learned the location of the Dragon of Ideals, I knew I had to get it before him. N then pulls out an ancient relic and states, they have this, the seal of the king, and if they find the doorway, this will grant them access to where the Dragon of Ideals sleeps. We can't let them get that dragon, or the war will start all over. Iris stares deeply at the seal of the king, thinking, I've seen that somewhere before. Then, Axu pops out Iris's hair to break the tension, and greets the little dragon. Hi, it's good to see you. I can feel the life force of Reshiram in you. Iris looks at N. Really, she says? And says yes. Once you've bonded with the legendary dragon, you can feel when they are near. N then turns to Axu and says thank you. If you wouldn't have appeared when you did, then I wouldn't have been set on the right path. Then they hear footsteps. Neo Team Plasma is close, and says they have to move. Back with Ash and Riolu, Ash is getting worried. He's been walking in the dark for a while now, and has not seen any way out. Not only that, but the cries he's been hearing from deep within are now getting closer. Ash looks down at Riolu in the dim light. It's still unresponsive. Ash's inner panic is starting to grow, but then, off in the distance, he sees a faint light of a flame. Ash calls to it, hey, can you help us? But the flame fades away, so Ash gives chase. Then, he can see the flame again as it fades into the darkness. Ash follows it urgently, as it's the only sign of hope that he's seen down here. After a while, Ash finally ends up in a room that seems to be flowing with energy. At the center of it sits a pedestal with what looks like a person on it. Ash calls to the individual, hey, can you help me? As he walks closer, we were attacked, and my Riolu is in pretty bad shape. It needs medical attention, or it may not make it. But as Ash gets closer, the person comes into focus, and Ash's hope turns to fear. What he sees is the remains of an individual, but they are not new. They have been here for a long time. Ash says, great, this is a tomb of some kind, and there's no way out. He then looks at Riolu. I'm sorry, buddy, he says, with tears welling up in his eyes. I won't be able to save you. We'll be stuck down here forever. Just then, Ash feels something push him from behind, knocking Riolu out of his hands. Ash tries to catch it, but Riolu falls on the floor on one of the veins of energy, and it is suddenly enveloped in light. When the light fades, Riolu wakes up. Ash is amazed. It seems the energy completely healed Riolu. Ash is deeply relieved, and he hugs Riolu, but then turns to the matter on hand. How did they get out of here? And who helped them get here? Ash is puzzled, but Riolu senses something. In response, it fires an aura sphere that is stopped in midair. Back with Roxie, things turn aggressive. She begins to yell at Damon and Carlita. Alright, you two, you need to come clean right now. Damon tells her she needs to be quiet, or Team Plasma will find them. Roxie loudly states, you two know more than you're letting on, so if you want to keep me quiet, then you need to spill it. Everything you know. Damon is hesitant, but Carlita tells Damon that Roxie is right. This time is different. The castle is swarming with Neo Team Plasma, and they alone will not be able to protect it. Roxie and her friends can help. They really don't have a choice. Damon reluctantly breaks and says okay, but in order to know why Team Plasma is here, you have to go back 3,000 years. Damon asks Roxie if she knows of the ancient war and the clash of ideals and truth. Roxie replies, yeah, the two brothers that fought and in the end resulted in no one winning. Damon says yes, that's part of it, but what most people don't know is that one of those brothers left Unova for a land across the sea, but the other one stayed here in Unova and sealed away the two dragons, so the world would never again face the terror that it had before. Reshiram, the Dragon of Truth, was sealed in the Dragon Spiral Tower. Roxie says, yeah, everyone knows that after what happened 2 years ago. Damon says yes, but what is not known is that the Dragon of Ideals, Zekrom, was sealed in this castle. Roxie asks, who are you two? Carlita says, we are some of the few remaining descendants of those two brothers. Roxie says, what? Damon says it's true. While the brother that exiled himself to the castle never had any offspring of his own, the brother that left for beyond the sea had 2 sons of his own. After many of the years, one of the sons returned to Unova to check on his uncle, but what he found was described as a sight of sadness. The king had died alone. It appeared that he spent his days here in the castle, creating elaborate passages to confuse anyone who would seek Zekrom, over time turning the castle into a giant vault. The son who returned to Unova then took up the mantle of king and chose to stay in Unova. Roxie says, so you're the descendants of the new king that came to Unova? Carlita says yes, the new king was the one who rebuilt Unova, even fighting a war from beyond the sea without the help of the legendary dragons. Roxie says, okay, this is an unbelievable story. Damon says, I know. Roxie then says, okay, but how did the king who lived here in the castle by himself do all that you claimed by himself? Damon asks what she means. Roxie says, well, you said the king lived in exile and he transformed this castle by himself. I have a hard time believing that. Carlita says true. There is one story that suggests that the exiled king actually wasn't alone in his final years. Damon then pulls out a book that it looks very old. He says, this is the king's journal. Damon then opens it up to the final page, the last entry from the exiled king, and he reads the final words of the exiled king. My days are nearing their end. I have but only one wish of those who find this last will and testament. Leave the castle as is. Do not change anything, for it has become home to my only true companion in my final years. Please maintain the Garden of Liberty, as it is the key to ideals and the favorite place of my dearest friend, Victini. That is where it ends, Damon says. Roxie asks, who's Victini? Carlita says, for the longest time, no one knew, but there are legends of a Pokemon in Unova that represented victory. Although we've never seen it ourselves, our family claims that Victini was this Pokemon, and in the king's life of exile, Victini was his only friend. Those things your friend Ash said he saw may have been Victini. It often causes mischief in the castle, but is never seen. Roxie asks, are you sure it's Victini? Damon says, what do you mean? Roxie states, even if the story of Victini is true, once the king passed, why would it stay? It could have left at any time. Carlita says true, but our family has come to believe that Victini is trapped here by some unseen force. That is why it can't leave. Roxie says that's a sad story. If it is true, then we are in trouble. Roxie then says, how do we get to where Zekrom is? We need to get there before Team Plasma. Damon says, that's the thing we don't know. Roxie says, what? Damon says that the exiled king spent his life hiding it. No one in our family has ever been able to find it. Roxie says, this is a problem. Then an alarm goes off. Team Plasma has gained access to the passage. Roxie says they need to move now. I really hope you guys enjoyed today's episode, and if you like the content that you're seeing, please don't forget to subscribe and like the videos. Also, don't forget to follow me on all my social medias like Twitter, and join the Patreon, as every little bit helps for me to continue to bring you the content that you like. I'm Ronan Charizard, and I'll see you in the next video.